We've got a special show today. We have been doing a series of podcasts on his latest book, Seventh Planet Mercury Rising. But today we're going to take a little break from those podcasts for a breather. We're still going to be on the subject of the Anunnaki, and we're going to talk about their home planet of Nibiru. And this is going to be a Nibiru special. And I asked Gerald to do this for a specific reason because, well, there is quite a Nibiru frenzy out there. And, big questions. Is it real? Is it coming our way? We're going to get into that, but I don't want to do a normal show. I want to do this from a scientific and logical perspective, and there's no better person to do this than Gerald Clark. And of course, you can follow Gerald Clark's work on geraldclark77.com. You can see everything that Gerald does there, and he has a wealth of information on the Sumerian culture, and he is an independent Assyriologist, and I like to coin that term for Gerald because it's exactly what he is. But today we're going to focus on Nibiru, and we're going to get into, so many things, what we know, analysis, everything we've got, and we're going to synthesize the data that's out there with the purpose of coming up with some answers for the public, because the people really are hungry for this, and it's incredibly important. So without further ado, let's bring on today's guest. Hi, Gerald. You're very welcome back to Capricorn Radio.
Hey, buddy. It's really good to be back. And I think it is timely that we do this. We said we were going to do it, and so I think, and based on spending an entire week focused on nothing but looking into this, I think we have a lot to share.
Sure. Gerald, just for the benefit of the audience, in preparation for this, you actually wrote an article. I call it an article because it's quite a large document, Gerald. It's like a mini book, to be honest with you. And you are prolific in everything you do, Gerald. And that's why I asked you, particularly for this show today, to do this from a scientist's perspective and a logical perspective. And you have the goods in that respect, Gerald. But just I'm going to refer people to this document, this article that you have done on the Nibiru analysis. And you'll catch that in the YouTube description. You'll have a link to your site for that as well, geraldclark77.com. It's an incredibly important document you've done too, Gerald, because you have done analysis with graphs, tables, King's List. You've tried that many angles to try and figure out any information we can about Nibiru. Like I say, is it coming our way? Is it even real? What do we know about it? What can we guess, and what can we reduce down to, at least a window of opportunity of kind of, pinpointing some sort of estimation on anything to do with this whole scenario. But so I'll just refer to the audience to that, Gerald. But I guess for me, the first thing, and I want to mention this, Gerald, is Hamlet's Mill. For me, the Nibiru source that I first came across was Hamlet's Mill, a book by Giorgio de Santiano and Hirschi von Decken, and it's an archaeoastronomy Bible, if you will, and it's been around since the 50s and 60s, Gerald. This is an MIT professor, a history of science, and he's been fully aware of this whole Nibiru, saying that it was the brightest star in the sky. He says there's many other tales in the Sumerian stuff, but this is one that people are going to have to wake up to, and they have to get over this label of mythology and start looking at this in an archaeoastronomy aspect, putting in this comparative mythology and archaeoastronomy and trying to synthesize it, Gerald.
Yeah, I just looked at the reference that you gave me on that book, and I was reading through the portion that he was discussing on the Enuma Elish and talking about the names of the planets in their particular celestial battle. And I was fascinated to see that he had access to a version where he was using the name of the Anunnaki home planet, calling it Nibiru, not Marduk, the way the old Babylonian version did. Once Marduk was in ascendancy, he changed the Enuma Elish so that he made their home planet his name. And everybody knew this, and Sitchin knew it as well. But I was looking for another source that would corroborate that, and this one did it.
Oh,
and
awesome.
I was really excited to see that.
Awesome. Yeah, and of course, I'm going to link that up in the box as well, Gerald, for people that want to follow Hamlet's Mill. It's actually it's a book that you can get. You can get the whole book online. It's got many ancient cultures in there. It's got many things in there from basically the history of precession and a lot of archaeoastronomy. All the alternative archaeoastronomers today, they all draw source material from this book. It was like one of the most important books of the 20th century for me, Gerald. And it's got so much in it. There's a small segment on Nibiru in there. And there's many stuff in there about Sumerian and Babylon.
I think it's amazing. I think it's amazing that it goes back to the 1950s as well.
Some of this research does, it's like it's been floating around down there. We're going to get to Harrington's research as well. We're going to get to some of the IRAS data and the satellite stuff. We're going to get some of the science, Gerald. But let's talk about the Sumerians King's List. I want you to tell me, what this has got to do with Nibiru. Why the flood significance to Nibiru? And tell me why we're going to get into the Sumerian King's List first to tackle the Nibiru question.
Well, when I first started talking about Sumerians, I had to talk about a couple of stories out of the Bible that would connect Western culture over to the Middle Eastern historical record. And one of those was the story of Noah, of course. Well, in that story, everybody knows it ended in a flood. So people have tried to pin down when Noah's flood is to determine when that was, to use it as a marker point in history. Well, if it's true that that flood was caused by the passage of Nibiru, then you could use that point in time to say, okay, it passed here. Let's add another 3,600 years, 3,600, and see when's it going to come by again. That's the whole idea. Mm. So the reason the Sumerian Kings list is important is because it lists at the end of the first rulership, and it took 240,400 years. This is table 1 from the document I wrote. Then the flood swept over, and then the next document picks up for the Sumerian Kings list and says after the flood. So it's talking about a great flood that happened. Now, the question is that Noah's flood? Because we know from Solon, when he went to the city of Sais in Egypt to find out about the history of the Greek people, in particular about Atlantis, they told him there were multiple floods, 4 major ones and multiple minor ones. Mm-hmm. So we don't. So what I was trying to do with this first point was using the dates of the rulership. Could we land at Noah's flood, which I believe personally, was at the end of the last ice age. So I think it was about 10,000 BC. Personally, some people believe it was 2,900 BC. So this is where it comes down to, is if you could pinpoint that, and you believe the assumption that it was caused by Nibiru, you'd have a passage point in history. Okay, this is one of the angles I tried to come at it from, and I did multiple angles, as any scientist would, to try to get to the truth here, and that's what's going to come out tonight, hopefully. And I was actually surprised at the outcome, so I'm actually very pleased. Just to let you know up front. Now, so I followed this. So what did I do? I said, well, Enki says he landed here between 450,000 years ago, according to Sitchin's timetable. And in some of the other sources, it could have been earlier, as early as 360,000 years ago. So I took the conservative one, 360,000 years, subtracted 240,400 from the first rulers from the Sumerian Kings list that ended with Ubaro Tutu. And I came up with, what did I come up with? 119,000, something like that. So it was 119,600 years. So I looked at that and said, well, that may have been a flood, but it certainly wasn't the 10,000 BCE. So I thought that was a dead end. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the thing that was in question there was, what was the actual date to use from Enki's arrival in order to start from prehistory and go forward to the flood. All right, so that was the first attempt. The next attempt was to go, okay, well, let's go after the flood, find a Sumerian king, because we have all their reigns, so we have the time that we could accumulate. Find a Sumerian king that was documented to be in the record so that we had a firm date in stone that he was actually a ruler there, and then work backwards to see what that time was for the flood. So I did that as well. And their total rulership for all the way to the point where they switched cities was 17,980 years, and that ended with Aga of Kish. Okay. So just prior to him was Enmebarajsi, and he served for 900 years. And according to this, he was the earliest ruler on the list that was confirmed independently from epigraphical sources. So I thought, okay, well, let's start from him, work backwards to the flood date that was given at the end of the first part of the King's list, and see where that landed us. Because so you just take 2,600 and start adding these dates of these previous rulers. So add 2,600 to about 16,000, and all of a sudden you see again you're not close to the 2,900 BCE flood that they claim, and also the one that we think happened at the end of the last ice age. Mm-hmm. So this is a problem with that approach, and so I found that as a dead end as well. From a scientific standpoint, it doesn't hold water.
Sure.
But they said there was a great flood there. So it looks like if you work backwards, and just using the last king on the list, that was 17,980 years. Let's call it 18,000 plus 2,600. So that would be almost 20,000 BC, which is way longer than the one that we were trying to work to. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. So I really didn't. It really didn't help me that much. Now, it says that in 2,900 BCE, they did find a sediment layer all the way up to an area, I think it was Sapar. No, they found localized flooding at Shuruppak and other layers that they found, and they radiocarbon dated it to 2,900 BC. But this could have been one of the minor floods, too, so it doesn't really, it's not convincing to me.
You know, I just read an article before I did the show, actually for a multitude of different reasons. I was doing Irish mythology, and there is a sunken, not a sunken city, there's a buried city on the west coast of Ireland that's been buried with flood deposit. It's some sort of a black mud or flood layer. Purported to be about 4000 BC, Gerald. It looks like there was a tsunami came in of some sort and hit the west of Ireland and buried a settlement there.
Yeah, well, another piece of evidence I had from way back in history, it just came to me. When I was going back and forth to Turkey, I remember them finding this vessel in the Sea of Marmara that apparently had been washed there from a flood that came in through the north from the Black Sea that spilled over the Strait of Bosphorus and washed this vessel down into the bottom of the ocean there. And they also found a bunch of farmhouses at the bottom of the Black Sea. Maybe the thing never made it over the Strait of Bosphorus, but it was at the bottom of the sea, the Black Sea or the Sea of Marmara. And they dated when they thought this event happened, and it turned out to be approximately 10,000 BCE, which was, I'm sorry, about 10,000 years ago, which was about 12,000 BCE. And it turned out to be, at the end of the last ice age. So a lot of evidence shows that a lot of the waters all around the Mediterranean rose a significant portion around that same time. So I think that was the flood of Noah. And there's been multiple ones, though. So this planet is flood prone.
Sure. It's an important line of inquiry for Nibiru, though, Gerald. I get why you start stuff like that, right. Because if Nibiru is coming close to us, we're going to get flood activity. We're going to get. It depends how close it crosses, though. If it's a planet after crossing, which is what it's described as, it depends how close it gets to us, Gerald. There's sometimes it comes past us in the orbit, and it doesn't affect us that much, though, Gerald. Is that correct?
That's right. It really just depends on whether where the Earth is when it causes its disturbances with the sun. And so if whether it's on the leeward or the windward side, essentially,
Sure.
So if you're on the downwind side where the radiation can come off the sun and strike the Earth due to its interactions with Nibiru, then that's a real problem. On top of that, I guess one of the worst problems is the magnetic effect in causing the planet to wobble about its polar orbit, which would cause great disturbances on a watery planet, and that seems to be the ongoing historical record. Flood after flood after flood, whether it's a major or minor one. So it really is a function of, like you said, where Nibiru is when it comes through.
Now, is there anything in the chronology, it's a vital line of research, Gerald, for these Nibiru passings, is there anything in the chronology that we can say is a definite?
Well, I thought I had some definite points from my Sumerian readings before, and I was glomming on to 3760 BCE because it seemed like a very important one. I was going to go and look up the story that was connected to that to see if it had any legs. And I didn't get around to looking back at that one. But I thought, well, let me just put it in an Excel spreadsheet, assume that is the date, and start working it forward and see if it corroborates with anything else. And it really did not. It did not corroborate well with the Ice Age, end of the last Ice Age, or with changes we've been seeing. So I didn't get a good feel from that. Now, Sitchin did the same thing. I think he was about 1,000 years off from 3760. He was closer to 4700 BCE. He thought it crossed. Well, when I did the math on that one, it still was, 2,000 years away, or 200 years away before it actually would affect us if that was true.
Mm-hmm.
So that didn't jive with some of the other evidence that we had that we're going to talk about a little bit later. So hopefully, if somebody had a true orbital table from the past and said definitively, here is a crossing that Nibiru came through, the whole thing would be solved. You could easily look at the periodicity of the planet, even if it's plus or minus some number of years. On average, it would come around about the same time.
Sure.
So,
let's get into the Enuma Elish.
Here's one thing we do know. It's been, from our recorded history from, since the biblical times, we have not seen the kind of destruction that was assigned to this destroyer planet in Revelations called Wormwood, that apparently drug meteors down to the Earth and all the other destructive things that is described in Revelations that is affiliated with this planet.
Mm-hmm.
So we haven't seen that. So here we've gone, 2015 years or so and not seen it. So in the best case, we're not going to see it for another 1,045 years.
Best case scenario.
In the worst case, it actually transited within that time period previous to the biblical times, about 1500 BCE or so. Now, if that's true, then it's due right now. Okay, so I did a table in the document to play around with those kind of thoughts to see, what corroborates here.
See the extremes of the situation.
Exactly. So for me, finding a fixed point in the past where it transited, I'm going to scour the Sumerian records one more time and see if I can come up with something. But I thought I had one before at 3760 BC, but it doesn't fit.
Sure. Gerald, let's go to the Enuma Elish. Let's talk about what we do now. Let's go into the solar system creation account. This is incredibly sophisticated and telling about the Nibiru planet system.
Yeah, when I first read this, it was kind of mishmashed to me. It was very long too, about 11 tablets. And then I thought, the only way to make sense of this is to sit down and correlate what their planet names are with our own. And once I did that, and then found out a little bit more about who the players were that were pretending to be these, it started out as this family relationship that had offspring that became planets that turned into a celestial battle. And some key names showed up in there, by the way. Enki's name, he was called Ea or Nudimmud. He showed up in there. His son Ningshita was referred to as Mumu there and was affiliated with the planet Mercury. Mm-hmm. So basically, the short story of the Babylonian epic of creation is, it appears that Nibiru and its satellites, moons, maybe even had its own sun, we don't know, was in an adjacent galaxy, is what it appears to have happened. Somehow, through the meandering through the galactic center, is my hypothesis, they got dislodged, at least their small portion did with their satellites, and it looks like there's up to 5 planets in the Nibiru constellation. Got dislodged and ended up, according to this allegorical battle in the Enuma Elish, getting trapped into our solar system orbit, in a retrograde orbit. Okay, so that's why it came in from the outside of Pluto. Well, in their account, they start talking about the different effects that the inner planets in the solar system are going to have relative to their satellites, and this is where the battle part comes in, because what if there's a collision? What if this one gets tugged on here and causes this? So they go through this whole account, very scientific if you understand now what it is they were talking about, that they did things to the planets in the inner orbit in order to avert collisions, including blowing a few things up and redirecting or masking the radiance or the radiation from a couple of planets, like the sun. Very, very intense, very advanced scientific understanding in this. So anyway, in the first pass through, one of their satellites had some problems. There was an existing planet they called Tiamat that sits approximately where the Earth is now. And through the perihelion transit, they describe all these actions they did. The second time through, though, there was a collision with one of their satellites with Tiamat. Mm-hmm. And this is what formed, half of it formed the Earth, part of it formed Kingu, the moon, which is our moon, and the debris from that formed what they called the hammered bracelet, which is our asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. So it's a very detailed account, and like I said, this was the document that was read in Babylon every spring under the auspices of Marduk, who was their chief deity, right? And in that document, he had renamed Nibiru to Marduk, mm-hmm. and they called it the planet of crossing. Well, so we find out that it's in a retrograde orbit, and that where it crosses either the solar ecliptic or the point at perihelion was what made it famous as this planet of crossing, because apparently it reshines or re-resonates or radiates the radiation from the sun. It's a very large planet. According to the data we're going to get into, it's 4 times larger than Jupiter. Now think about this. It had to be larger than Jupiter in order to cause Jupiter and Neptune and Uranus to end up with these tilts in their orbit. Mm-hmm. It had to be a very large planet for that to happen. So now, as you'll see, it looks to be about 17 times bigger than the Earth and about 4 times bigger than Jupiter. So with that said, its magnetic effect, its pull on the Earth would be quite significant were it to come within some close proximity. And so that could explain a lot of the past pole shifts, the change in our magnetic flux that's happening on the Earth now. Mm-hmm. It's been moving significantly. And so something is causing that. So I postulated to you earlier, and I didn't really put this in here, that, we were also told by the Mayans that we'd be going through the galactic center about 2011, 2013, somewhere in there. Okay, some people think it was winter solstice 2012, and Ian Lungold said no, it was October 2011. So if that was the case, it could explain adjacent planets warming up. It could potentially explain the gravitational North Pole changing, and a lot of the other Earth changes we're seeing. At the same time, if my theory, my hypothesis was true in the first place, that the great year, this passage through the galactic center, could be the disturbance force that caused Nibiru's constellation to get caught up in our solar system in the first place. Well, if that is the case, then those two events will be correlated. So this Mayan prediction and Nibiru's return could be correlated because of that reason.
Sure. Yeah. We're talking something like, when we say a planet, it's most likely something like a failed second sun, Gerald. Is it safe to say that? Is that probably the best guess we've got at the moment? It's like a failed second sun, like a red dwarf or brown dwarf that's got satellite planets.
Use whatever term you want. Its effect on light is what's important because of its ability to be observed. And according to Dr. Harrington and Dr. Neugebauer, who was from JPL, and this is in the 1980, early 81 or so, they were discussing the infrared satellite settings that would be needed to detect this planet. And they said something very telling. They said that the planet is so cold that they had to, unless you had an instrument that could be cooled to 20 degrees above, minus 425 degrees Fahrenheit, that you would not be able to detect it. So you've got to super cool your instrument in order to detect this thing because it's not reflecting light. It's in the infrared. Okay, so is that a failed star? I don't know. It could still have magma inside it, but the surface of the planet is very cold.
Sure. Yeah, I know. Giorgio De Santillano in Hamlet's Mill talks about Neugebauer's data as well. He gets into a lot of the astronomical stuff as well. There is no doubt, though, that the amount of context we have for this Nibiru in historical text, though, Gerald, and I want to focus a little bit on this. This is quite important. We get into some of the science and the astronomy in a bit. But, the amount of times we have this Nibiru planet mentioned, either Nibiru or Marduk, the way that you describe it, there is nothing else that can fit this other than a planet, Gerald. I mean, it's not a star, because a star just doesn't do what this thing is supposed to do. Yes, it does reflect a lot of light because of the nature of what it is and how it comes into our solar system. But there's only one thing that fits this, and that's like a planet with a very long oval trajectory. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, you go all the way back to the late 1700s. There were the first people that were using telescopes that were searching for whatever. They hadn't even found Pluto yet, okay? We didn't find Pluto until the 1930s. These guys were focused on what is disturbing the outer planets. A real physical, tangible question. What is so large that disturbed them off of the solar ecliptic? They wanted to know, and it's still a valid question today. Okay, something tangible that had a interactive effect, either collision or a magnetic or gravitational effect, changed the orbit of these very massive planets. And that has been a search for the astronomical community for a very long time. And it turns out that Tombaugh, who was working for, who was he? I think he was with the IRAS. I think he was with the IRAS program too. Or I can't remember where he's from, but he actually got accredited with finding Pluto in the 1930s, but it was by accident. They were actually looking for what this big object was that could have affected our outer giants, planetary giants.
Sure. Wow, incredible, Gerald. Gerald, I mean, let's get into Sitchin, in-step Sitchin in 76. He brings in this incredible tablet, this imprint of a cylinder seal, the famous photograph, but it's a photograph of a cylinder seal. It's in the Berlin Museum. It's known as VA243. Not a very illustrious name, Gerald, but
very controversial.
Yeah. VA243, probably the most controversial cylinder seal in existence. You know I love cylinder seals, Gerald. So
I know. I actually put this in the document because I knew how much you love cylinder seals, and I had some fun. I had a little bit of fun with this one.
But I like your analysis, though, Gerald. I like your analysis. Now I'm going to again refer the audience to the book or the document, the article that you wrote in the YouTube description. Get a copy of this because it's got all the pictures, tables, data, and the analysis all there. Very, very thorough document, Gerald. But I'll be honest, I mean, I just looked at this as just a pure picture, and it's only when I see the analysis that you've done, Gerald, with the relative sizes of there's a lot of criticism of this, but the criticism, Gerald, that you have seems to have dispelled here for me. I mean, it's great because it seems like a no-brainer. This it's showing relative sizes, Gerald, and it looks like it is actually Nibiru in the center. I mean, it doesn't look like it's a star, or a sun, or it's a star.
Yeah, well, so I'll give a little background. So this very controversial cylinder seal, and I know how difficult it must have been to etch this thing on stone and roll this thing out. Now that you look at the detail, and anyway, in between two of the beings on the top left, it looks like a primitive worker is being led by the hand and introduced to an Anunnaki deity that's seated with the plow. And I'll have to go and decode the cuneiform that's on there. It's not hard. We have a cuneiform script and a dictionary now, so anybody could do it. And I'll look at see what some of the words say on here. But just looking at it from the historical record, it was interesting to me because, number one, it shows a circle with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 7 points around it. Okay, and the Anunnaki oftentimes used a star symbol to represent different planets. Mm-hmm. So a 7-pointed star would refer to the Earth, a 6-pointed to Mars, and from there, Enuma Elish, that we assign numbers to the planets based on working from the outside in, from Pluto inward, and then theirs ending up as the 12th planet because they were the last ones in. So that's how we ended up calling the Earth the 7th planet. Okay. Sure. So anyway, so this cylinder seal that Sitchin was so focused on had in between this primitive worker and this liaison that was going to introduce him to his enslaved role as a farmer working with the plow. Right in between them was this star-looking symbol, a very large circular dot in between, and then several other dots around them that looked like planets around an orbit, okay, around a sun, around a central sun, just like our solar system. And so it turns out that Sitchin was very excited about that because there weren't just 9 planets, there were 10. So he believed that they were talking about an additional planet in our solar system that we hadn't accounted for, even in the 1930s when we found Pluto. Okay. So on the cylinder seal, it became controversial as to using it as a source, whether there was another planet out there or not. Okay. So he wrote about this in the 12th planet. This controversy, I don't know, kind of came to a head even more so after his death. But basically, what can we take these dots or these circles and this central sun-looking picture to mean? Could it be representational of a chronology in time when the plow was given to mankind? So it's commemorating some ephemeris. If you were to look at those as, well, are these the planets and the zodiacal houses are in at the time? Is this a time marker to commemorate this event, or is it a indication of where the Earth was at the time when the event, just the Earth itself, because it's got a sun with 7 points on it. Mm-hmm. So that means it's pretty specific to the radiation that's hitting the 7th planet to me, not that it's the 7th planet, okay? Because it's shown much larger than the other spheres. So all of a sudden you go, well, why are the circles different sizes? Mm-hmm. And so this kind of led to a lot of questions, and a lot of people have attacked the theory of Nibiru even existing just simply based on this single piece of evidence, which I think is absurd. But some people have done it, okay? So I decided to, I don't know, take another look at this and see if there's anything else we could glean from what they were saying on this seal. See, is that, now, there's a historical story that came from some of Sitchin's writings and others, that even in the Cain and Abel story from the Sumerians, we had Anunnaki siblings from the Enkiite and Enlilite clan interacting with them. For instance, according to the story, Abel, the son of Adam, there was Cain and Abel. Well, Abel was taught to do farming by Ninurta, which was Enlil's son. The warrior Ninurta was also known as Apollo. Well, the Cain portion, the Cain offspring was taught herdsmanship and cattle management by none other than Marduk. And then you have the biblical story of Cain and Abel, and Cain killing Abel with a stone because he didn't receive the same praise from Enki that Cain did for meat production. Okay, so it was kind of a very crazy story and a very crazy tie-in with the Anunnaki. So I thought, well, let's look at these orbs on here and see if, knowing that you studied cylinder seals and they are very precise. I mean, just crazy precise how they could even do this in the first place. So would they have haphazardly drawn these on here? And can it tell us anything? So I started looking into that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I glommed onto someone else's research who had, and this is shown in Figure 3, VA 243 planet numbering, basically starting from the smallest circle on that blown up picture from VA 243 and assigning numbers to it. You'll end up with 1 through 12. Okay.
Sure.
And the smallest one probably being Pluto, since we know it's the smallest planet, and then the largest one being the Sun. Okay, which turns out to be right in the. And all the other planets orbit the Sun anyway, so it kind of makes sense to make that assumption. No matter whether there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 points on this central Sun, which is making it look like a star, which is interesting. Okay,
mm-hmm.
So numbering them that way, and then putting them into a table, and then going to the detail log from the ephemeris and looking up their actual diameters in kilometers. That's what is shown in Figure 4. Okay. Now, somebody took it upon themselves to take this picture and blow it up, and then actually measure the pixel sizes across each of these spheres, these two-dimensional circles representing spheres, and then put them in a table as well, and see if they correlated with the actual diameters in kilometers of our planets. Of course, now think about this problem. You got a huge constellation of, or our solar system that you're trying to represent in a very small space. How do you do that? How do you do that such that the planets even show up? Because if that was the case, and you had to show the Sun and actually show Pluto on there, maybe you'll get the Sun, but then you wouldn't get many of the other planets because they're so small. You'd have to show them like little tiny dots. You understand what I'm saying?
Don't they have this problem?
There's a scaling problem.
Yeah,
okay?
Don't they have this problem printing astronomy books as well, Gerald? They represent the solar system in a different scale to what it actually is, so that they can actually make it more easy to interpret for the reader or the viewer.
Yeah, it's like a geometrical transform.
Yeah,
is what you're doing. Okay, so that you can spatially still show them correctly, even though you have to go through the transform to make them show back up the way they should be. Understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I went through some of this research, and I thought, okay, well let me follow this through. So the basic idea is to find and see if the size of these circles on VA 243 have any correlation whatsoever to the actual planet sizes in our constellation, so that you could say these are stars or these are planets or just what, right? Let's use math. So in doing that, I'm going to skip forward to what I call Figure 6, where I decided to play a couple of games, because in order for them to make those planets show up in any kind of geometric transform, they would have had to use a logarithmic scale. There's no way you could use a linear scale and get them in that small space. And it's not so much the space as it is their size relative to each other, so that you can still see them all. You with me?
Yeah.
And have them still be scalable.
Log scaling is something we use all the time, John.
So I went through a logarithmic scaling to look at the actual diameter in kilometers and the actual diameter in pixels. Okay. And of course, the pixel size is very different relative to something in kilometers. So what you do with something like that is you look for a way to do a transform and see if there's a correlation for every point using the same transform, not a different transform, okay? Mm-hmm. So you can go back and forth between data sets. Well, that's what I did. So I decided to use a little Anunnaki trick and use a kind of a sexagesimal logarithmic, not a base 10, and take the log base 66 of the diameter of the actual planets, and then compare that with the log base 6 of the smaller representation of the pixels that had to be placed on the cylinder seal,
mm-hmm.
okay?
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I did that, well, first of all, I just took the pixel diameter and see if it correlated with the diameter of the planets from Pluto all the way to the Sun. Okay, and they're ordered in that order from smallest to largest. Okay, so when I did that, I ended up with a correlation of 89.98%. Not very good. Okay, it's okay. It's better than average, but still, it's not enough to convince me that okay, those dots, excuse me, on the cylinder seal correspond to the actual planets in our system. But when you compare the log base 66 of the diameter in kilometers with the log base 6 of the pixel size, you get a 99.503% correlation. So what I'm telling you is those dots were not arbitrarily sized on VA 243. They were intentionally scaled logarithmically to represent all the planets that are in our solar system.
You couldn't ask for that accuracy,
including theirs.
You really couldn't ask for accuracy that good. I mean, you couldn't. To get a
No.
99.5% accuracy correlation is beautiful. It's almost exact. It's actually within, scientific measurements, like, to allow a plus or minus
Well,
5.5%.
whoever was chiseling that little seal, they probably got to that point and they said, that's probably good enough for the girls we run around with. I don't know, but
For sure.
it's very. Now, the other thing that brings up is if they spent that much time making sure the sizes corresponded to each other relative to actual planet size, like I said, the other next analysis is do the locations now map to zodiacal houses in the ecliptic that correspond to a time in the past history that this event occurred. That makes sense to me. Why else would you put it there?
Sure.
Right? So anyway, it turned out to be, I don't know, I think it turned out to be a victory for Sitchin and a loss for his critics, because the reality is what he said about it is it does represent our solar system, and it does include a 10th planet, which they, in their documents, call it Marduk from the old Babylonian version, and they call it Nibiru in that Hamlet Mill document, and other Akkadian documents as well. But I've been trying to find a good one that I could use, and I couldn't find a good reference. So I was happy to see that from the Hamlet Mill, that over and over and over again, everywhere where Marduk's name had replaced the planetary name, it was Nibiru.
Incredible. This is the relative sizes and the distances, Gerald. They're just the proportions. It's all, and positions. It's all beautiful. It's all beautiful. The more I look at it now with the analysis that you done, Gerald, the more it makes sense to me. It's clearly.
Well, I figured if anybody got it, you would, being an expert on cylinder seals.
Yeah.
So I thought, who better to share this thought with than you?
Here's the thing, Gerald. Here's the thing. If that picture wasn't on a cylinder seal, if that picture drawing a representation of the solar system that we're purporting, right? If that was done on a piece of paper, you could say that they put that randomly there somewhere. But to get it onto a cylinder seal that accurate, I mean, they knew exactly what they're doing. That wasn't by chance, Gerald. Not on a cylinder seal. You could say that. You could say that on a flat piece of paper or something. Not on that something that accurate, that position.
Well, it's not huge in the first place. I mean, just think about the precision that had to go into that.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing,
Mm-hmm.
actually.
I could talk cylinder seals all day, and I'll point.
I know you can, and I was never that, I don't know, drawn to them. But the more I see what the absolute technology and precision they put into those things, I mean, it just blows you away.
Just for the listeners, I showed Gerald a picture of a cylinder seal from the British Museum during the week there, made out of rock crystal, 9 out of 10 on the Mohs scale, showing the anatomy of animals sitting down with their legs bent, and you can see the muscles on the legs and how they bend their legs. And to draw any anatomy, whether it's human or animal anatomy, is incredibly hard to do in artistic expression, and especially hard to do in 3 dimensions, or embossing it into reverse embossing it into a piece of crystal. I mean, you need to cut that thing with diamond or crystal. It's incredibly sophisticated accuracy, down to millimeters of depth, so that it's imprinted into clay when it's rolled out. Like, these guys could do it, Gerald. I mean, you see the example.
Well, it's impressive that not only did they do it in a reverse imprint, so you had to put ditches where the mounds were going to show up, but they did it in reverse. I mean, that's that's incredibly difficult.
Sophisticated. Yeah. VA243. I'll let the listeners look that up in Google Images. You'll see the famed picture, and the analysis of this, Gerald. Now, from what I've seen in your document, it's wonderful. It's wonderful to see that. It gives us a good foundation. Nibiru is real. Nibiru's there, and it's done to scale as well. I just want to mention John Matisse and Daniel Whitmire. I mean, these guys have suggested in '99 that there was a Planet X type body in the Oort cloud. And the bit that gets me, Gerald, is that these guys mention this thing as if it's something totally new. It's just this new idea, These guys, being astronomers, must be aware of Stitch's work. They must be aware of the existing Planet X mystery, the existing Nibiru case that's out there in the public domain. Of course, every astronomer out there is aware of this. They may not talk about it, but to come up with a Planet X as if it's just a new idea. But again, they've recently said that it's out there and it's a failed second sun, and it's like people. I don't even know whether this stuff is disinformation or is it to take the eyes off the real Planet X Nibiru. But what's your thoughts on that, Gerald? It's pretty sure that there's something else. There's something else tugging on the planets. We know that.
Yeah, I remember seeing their research, and it actually ended up on a documentary, I believe, in about 1999. And it was a retelling of the same stuff that had gone on with Sitchin and Harrington prior, but maybe because of the political environment, they were trying to rediscover it, reintroduce it under some other name, perhaps, or other venues, so that it was disambiguated from the past. I don't know what their motivation was, to pretend like it had never been discussed before.
Yeah,
they may have had maybe they had to do that for funding reasons. I don't know.
Yeah, I just got a good point there. Maybe they did it for funding reasons, but no, I mean, there may be large icy bodies out there, but I don't think the fail second sun's out there in the Oort cloud. I think, yeah, I definitely think there's something tugging on the planets. We mathematically know it. Just for the listeners that are new to the Nibiru scenario, it's mathematically known that there's something tugging on the outer planets. There's something there, and it's not Pluto, because Pluto hasn't got the mass to do it. We know that. We know that mathematically. Well, that's how they find these planets. They mathematically know.
Well, not only was it tugging on them, but it tugged on them so hard that they're displaced in their orbit. That's a point I want to re-emphasize. Okay, they got tugged on so hard, at least at one point, where their orbits are changed and they've never gone back. Okay, so this is a significant issue. It's like, and I'm sure we're going to get to it in just a minute when we talk about that, but it's not just a tugging. Okay, it's a real physical planar change.
It's dislodging them. It's totally dislodging them.
Yes.
Wow.
Now, and I'll reiterate, whatever it is, it couldn't have been Pluto, because it had to be so large to dislodge a planet that had to be smaller than it was. Okay, so whatever it came through, it had to be larger than Neptune and Uranus in order to have that happen. That means it's very large.
I mean, Neptune and Uranus are big planets. I mean, this thing.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are.
If you're gonna dislodge them, you got a seriously big body out there, John.
Yeah, just from a sizing standpoint, just real quick. The sun is 1,392,684 kilometers in diameter. Nibiru is shown at 226,973, and Jupiter, the next biggest planet, is at 142,984. So Nibiru is bigger than Jupiter, and it's bigger than Saturn, that's sitting at 120,536. Okay, so basically Nibiru looks like about 17 times bigger than the Earth, and it's more than 2 times bigger than Jupiter. Actually, it looks like almost 3 times bigger than Jupiter.
Sure.
Yeah. So it's a big planet.
I mean, people aren't living on Nibiru. It's probably the satellite moons that they're living on, though, Gerald. Is that correct?
Probably. Actually, they're probably on various planets throughout the solar system and other galaxies, doing the same thing, gathering resources and occupying the place, just like they did the planet Earth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about Harrington. This is for me where the astronomy comes in now, Gerald. There's original analysis done by Harrington. We might even be able to expand on that later in the show, but let's talk about what we know about Harrington first, the Harrington background, and of course the famous IRAS satellite.
Okay, well, I'll try to do this from memory. I have his video on my website where he met with Zecharia Sitchin in August of 1991, I believe it was. I'll have to look at that. Let me look just real quick and see if that's the date. August 30th, 1990. Harrington met with Sitchin, Washington, D.C. Now, he's the supervising astronomer of the United States Naval Observatory. Okay, he's a top dude. Okay, so here, apparently, according to him, in this video, he says about 1978 time frame, and Sitchin wrote his book 12th Planet in 1976, and somehow Harrington got a copy of it and had read the Enuma Elish closely, understanding that it appears in their celestial battle account that there was an intruder planet at the edge of our solar system, and in his mind he was, that's what disturbed Neptune, Uranus, and blah blah blah, right? The hidden mystery planet that was large enough that could do this. This is what he was looking for, just like all these guys were. Okay. Mm-hmm. So this was about 1978 time frame. Now he says after meeting with Sitchin, looking at his orbital chart, they basically conferred, nodded, and said, yeah, that's the same planet that you've talked about in your 12th planet that we're looking for. And instead of where you've got your orbital diagram drawn in these zodiacal houses, if you take into account the precession that's happened since biblical times, it would be right here. And he showed him a diagram, and I put that in the document, okay? Now, I didn't think much about that document, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what I did with it in just a second. So Harrington took some action based on this information that he corroborated with Sitchin. And he said 6 months after he had gotten this information in his head, he had actually commissioned Voyager 1, Voyager 2, and then Pioneer 10 and 11. So Pioneer 10, if you see this diagram that he showed in his orbital chart when they were discussing, Pioneer 10 was positioned at the perihelion point to see any planet that came in around the sun on the backside where the Earth might be shielded from it, or couldn't see it because of the brightness of the sun. Pioneer 11 was placed at the location that Harrington believed Nibiru would be coming in its retrograde orbit from the south, and he split the orbital pattern with Pioneer 11. So it was looking in a way where it could see it coming or going. But with Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, he put those at the aphelion and perihelion inbound and outbound locations exactly on the zodiacal house, one looking out and one looking in. So it's very, very telling about where they were putting these instruments and what they were looking for. Okay, and this shows up on the diagram, and I think that's so interesting. So what else could we tell from this interaction with these two? Well, according to the diagram, Harrington had shown the location of Nibiru, and so had Sitchin, and they just drawn a circle on this orbital chart. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, they had not used the logarithmic scaling like the Anunnaki had done on their cylinder seal, and instead of drawing the planets in their orbits around the sun on this chart, they had just drawn circular, spherical, two-dimensional paths around it to indicate where the planet would be, but not the size of the planet, so you could do a comparison. Sure. Okay, sure. So I was going to play that same trick with their diagram as we did with the cylinder seal, but I couldn't do it. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so the only planet they showed in a circle in 2 dimensions was Nibiru, and it was shown just outside of Pluto. Okay, just outside it, not a huge distance away. So I thought, well, I wonder if that's the scale, and I'll show you what I did with that in a little while. Anyway, so let's go forward with Harrington's story just a little bit farther. So this was circa 1978. They send their probes out, blah, blah, blah. And he didn't meet with Sitchin until 1990, which I found very interesting. Several years after he'd read his book.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here it is, 1990. The guy's the supervising astronomer at the U.S. Naval Observatory, and he's making a video with an alternative cosmogony guy like Sitchin, and somehow the government's allowing it. I don't understand that. But that's crazy. Think about that happening now. Right?
It's incredible that they're using Pioneer and Voyager and the Eros satellite, Gerald, to look for this planet X. And, you know, still, there's silence from NASA. Silence.
Yeah. So in my figure 9 in this document, I showed the viewing range, or the field of view for Pioneer 11 and Voyager 2. And it doesn't show Pioneer 10, Voyager 1, because it's a little bit out of the scene. But you can see on that particular one, he's in Sagittarius and Scorpio, which is exactly, if you look, actually this was the prediction from Bill Broussard, was Sagittarius and Scorpio, where those two ended up. Mm-hmm. He had Voyager 2 on the outbound path for Nibiru, according to Sitchin's chart, which turned out to be close enough to the inbound path for Broussard's, or the next precession of the equinox into a zodiacal house from biblical times, about 2,000 years, so that he could hedge his bet. So basically, they hedged their bet on whether it was in the next zodiacal house or the one after it, and how they placed their probes. So you can clearly see Harrington's hand here, just as he said, in going out and taking definitive action to find this thing. So, yeah. So what do we know? In 1981. The first article came out. Are we ready to talk about that? Or actually, well, let's talk a little bit more about Harrington. No, let's do this, and then we'll go back to Harrington, because in 1991 was the next big event. So 1981, the first article showed up in the newspaper talking about this 10th planet. And this was in the Detroit News, January 16th, 1981.
Sure.
Now, so it says 10th planet, Pluto orbit says yes. Okay, well, it wasn't just Pluto's orbit, but it was Neptune. It was the big planets as well.
Yeah.
So I tried to read this article, but I couldn't find a legible version of it online. Are you with me?
Yeah, I must still be in like the libraries and the archives there.
Oh, sure. So anyway, I did find another article. There were several other articles that came out in the same year. So there was another one that came out in the New York Times, January 30th, 1981, where they're talking about Harrington and Planet X. And in this one, there was something that was legible that I could see that I kind of focused in on. And then the Washington Post one with Thomas O'Toole was even better. And it came out 2 years later, 1983. Well, anyway, in 1981, the New York Times, Harrington states that he thinks Planet X is 5 billion miles outside of Pluto's orbit. And that must be at the time that he was looking, so 1981.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we know that Pluto's distance is about 3.6 billion years from the sun. So, you're talking about, if you add those together, that's about 8.67 billion years at that point, away from the sun at that point in 1981. That's what he's saying. So then all of a sudden you get excited as an engineer and go, oh, distance equals rate times time. Maybe I could figure out how fast it was traveling. When's it going to be here? That's what everybody wants to know, right?
Yeah, at least
anyway,
we got some data.
So that stuck in my mind, though, that he had assigned a distance to it. That means from this IRS data that they gathered, he thought it was 5 billion miles. Okay, now in this next article, the Washington Post, by Thomas O'Toole, the next major character shows up that I think is very important to this story, and his name's Dr. Jerry Neubauer, and he was the IRAS chief scientist for California's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and he was the director of the Palomar Observatory for Caltech, where my kids in college there. Okay, so he's an important dude. He's got his fingers on the data from the IRAS satellite, the one that had to be super cooled, right, to detect this thing. So he shows up in this article, and he's almost like he's in disagreement with Harrington, and it's interesting because he says he thinks it's 50 billion miles away, not 5 billion outside of Pluto. Okay, so there's contradiction number one. Okay, and additionally, he stated that he was trying to douse any fears by saying that it's not inbound. Okay, but at the same time, one of the other scientists said that even if it's 50 billion miles that close to the Earth, then it's part of our solar system, is what he was saying.
Sure.
So this was a guy named James Houck from Cornell University. Okay, so these are serious scientists talking about this. This is not conspiracy theory stuff. This is just pure scientific data from the IRAS satellite in 1981. Okay. Now, what's interesting is they were clever enough to say, well, is it moving or not? So in order to do that, you've got to take two measurements. And they call it the blink method, right? You take one and wait some period of known time and take another one and then come up with the delta x and the delta time, and you can come up with the speed, change in x over change in time.
Sure. Okay,
so apparently Harrington waited 6 months after his first measurement to take a picture of this from the IRAS. Okay, so they had a really good blink. Okay, and this is where Neubauer comes up and says it's 50 billion miles away, and talks about all the super cooling they had to do to get the picture. And then he says something very significant. He says it's not incoming. Neubauer said, I want to douse that idea with as much cold water as I can. Now, why would he say such a thing if they had just taken the blink method of it, but didn't discuss anything about the data? That's very curious to me.
So it's murky. It's very, very murky to do that.
Yeah. So I don't know what role this guy was playing. He almost seems to have been playing a little bit of a disinformation role. Whoever this guy was put in a position to have access to this data directly from the IRAS scope. Okay, but the bottom line is none of them disagreed that they had found something very large. What appears to be in disagreement is how far away it was, and whether it was moving, right? Mm-hmm. So that got left out of the article. But the next link I found as I was starting to look at articles, I had no idea how many articles have been published on Planet X Nibiru. By the way, I gave you a link on this in this section. It's on page 25.
Sure.
It goes all the way back to the 50s, and there are hundreds of articles, not just 5 or 6. There are hundreds.
I got through a couple, Gerald. I got through a couple. There's so many. I mean, it's mind-blowing.
There's so many. So the idea that there's something tangible at the end of the universe that's disturbing big planets is so physical and believable to people that it's been a focal point for investigation for a very long time. Okay, that's not new. Okay, so I wanted to finish up with that. Now, so we got to 1981. There were several more articles. Almost every year you see in that link that I gave you, talking about Planet X updates. Well, it turned out there was some real disinformation going on in the year 1991. But it turns out that was the year also right after Harrington had done this interview with Sitchin, apparently he went off to this place in New Zealand that we looked up. Do you remember where that was in New Zealand?
Black Birch, I think it was.
Right. So he took an 8-inch telescope there on his own to go see if he could actually get personal images using the blink method, like we were describing here, 2 different measurements at different times, and then seeing if it had moved and how fast it was moving. Well, let's think about that for just a second. Number one, he was so convinced by the IRS data that this thing is inbound and that it's within the distance that he could see it from the southern hemisphere, or looking from New Zealand south. He believed it was in the constellation Libra, coming in near Cassiopeia. Mm-hmm. Okay, so in the diagram I showed Google Earth where that was. Okay, so it coincides with this southern path that Harrington believed in as well, but he added his precessional updates to make it more accurate. And Sitchin did not disagree with him, by the way, when he said that. Mm-hmm. Okay, so here he is in New Zealand, and I don't have the article in front of me, but he went there to get data, and he was due back to release this data at a conference in the United States when he came back. Well, apparently he never came back and died suddenly of throat cancer there in New Zealand with his 8-inch scope. Now think about that, the just audacity of a cancer killing somebody that quickly, getting on an airplane, going over there, not talking about being a victim of cancer and all of a sudden just dying from it within a short period. I just don't buy it. I don't buy it. So very, very, very significant red flags in the demise of Harrington and what he was doing relative to this planet that had been discovered. Mm-hmm. Listen, he was the supervising astronomer. He came back with his personal data that probably got absconded with through whatever forces were controlling the IRS data directly. Mm-hmm. It looks like he was headed off the path and he was not allowed to share that. But what I want you to take away from that is if he was able to take an 8-inch scope and potentially see it inbound to the point where it goes into perihelion with the sun, where it basically goes behind the sun, you can't see it. If he was able, his belief that he could go someplace and look south and see this for some period of time, and apparently this was one of the few places on the planet, according to him, based on the thickness of the atmosphere and several other issues, that he could actually see it.
We've got a special show today. We have been doing a series of podcasts on his latest book, Seventh Planet Mercury Rising, but today we're going to take a little break from those podcasts for a breather. We're still going to be on the subject of the Anunnaki, and we're going to talk about their home planet of Nibiru. This is going to be a Nibiru special, and I asked Gerald to do this for a specific reason because, well, there is quite a Nibiru frenzy out there, and big questions. Is it real? Is it coming our way? We're going to get into that, but I don't want to do a normal show. I want to do this from a scientific and logical perspective, and there's no better person to do this than Gerald Clark. And of course, you can follow Gerald Clark's work on geraldclark77.com. You can see everything that Gerald does there, and he has a wealth of information on the Sumerian culture, and he is an independent Assyriologist, and I like to coin that term for Gerald because it's exactly what he is. But today we're going to focus on Nibiru, and we're going to get into, so many things, what we know, analysis, everything we've got, and we're going to synthesize the data that's out there with the purpose of coming up with some answers for the public, because the people really are hungry for this, and it's incredibly important. So without further ado, let's bring on today's guest. Hi, Gerald. You're very welcome back to Capricorn Radio.
Hey, buddy. It's really good to be back. And I think it is timely that we do this. We said we were going to do it, and so I think, and based on spending an entire week of focused on nothing but looking into this, I think we have a lot to share.
Sure. Gerald, just for the benefit of the audience, in preparation for this, you actually wrote an article. I call it an article because it's quite a large document, Gerald. It's like a mini book, to be honest with you. And you are prolific in everything you do, Gerald. And that's why I asked you, particularly for this show today, to do this from a scientist's perspective and a logical perspective. And you have the goods in that respect, Gerald. And I'm going to refer people to this document, this article that you have done on the Nibiru analysis. And you'll catch that in the YouTube description. You'll have a link to your site for that as well, geraldclark77.com. It's an incredibly important document you've done too, Gerald, because you have done analysis with graphs, tables, King's List. You've tried that many angles to try and figure out any information we can about Nibiru. Like I say, is it coming our way? Is it even real? What do we know about it? What can we guess, and what can we reduce down to, at least a window of opportunity of kind of pinpointing some sort of estimation on anything to do with this whole scenario. But so I'll just refer to the audience in that, Gerald. But I guess. For me, the first thing, and I want to mention this, Gerald, is Hamlet's Mill. For me, the Nibiru source that I first came across was Hamlet's Mill, a book by Giorgio de Santiano and Hirschi von Decken, and it's an archaeoastronomy Bible, if you will, and it's been around since the 50s and 60s, Gerald. This is an MIT professor on history of science, and he's been fully aware of this whole Nibiru, saying that it was the brightest star in the sky. He says there's many other tales in the Sumerian stuff, but this is one that people are going to have to wake up to, and they have to get over this label of mythology and start looking at this in an archaeoastronomy aspect, putting in this comparative mythology and archaeoastronomy and trying to synthesize it, Gerald.
Yeah, I just looked at the reference that you gave me on that book, and I was reading through the portion that he was discussing on the Enuma Elish and talking about the names of the planets in their particular celestial battle. And I was fascinated to see that he had access to a version where he was using the name of the Anunnaki home planet, calling it Nibiru, not Marduk, the way the old Babylonian version did. Once Marduk was in ascendancy, he changed the Enuma Elish so that he made their home planet his name. And everybody knew this, and Sitchin knew it as well. But I was looking for another source that would corroborate that, and this one did it.
Oh,
and
awesome.
I was really excited to see that.
Awesome. Yeah, and of course, I'm going to link that up in the box as well, Gerald, for people that want to follow Hamlet's Mill. It's actually it's a book that you can get. You can get the whole book online. It's got many ancient cultures in there. It's got many things in there from basically the history of precession and a lot of archaeoastronomy. All the alternative archaeoastronomers today, they all draw source material from this book. It was like one of the most important books of the 20th century for me, Gerald. And it's got so much in it. There's a small segment on Nibiru in there. And there's many stuff in there about Sumerian and Babylon.
I think it's amazing that it goes back to the 1950s as well.
Some of this research does, it's like it's been floating around down there. We're going to get to Harrington's research as well. We're going to get to some of the IRAS data and the satellite stuff. We're going to get some of the science, Gerald. But let's talk about the Sumerians' King's List. I want you to tell me, what this has got to do with Nibiru. Why the flood significance to Nibiru? And tell me why we're going to get into the Sumerian King's List first to tackle the Nibiru question.
Well, when I first started talking about Sumerians, I had to talk about a couple of stories out of the Bible that would connect Western culture over to the Middle Eastern historical record. And one of those was the story of Noah, of course. Well, in that story, everybody knows it ended in a flood. So people have tried to pin down when Noah's flood is to determine when that was, to use it as a marker point in history. Well, if it's true that that flood was caused by the passage of Nibiru, then you could use that point in time to say, okay, it passed here. Let's add another 3,600 years, 3,600, and see when's it going to come by again. That's the whole idea. So the reason the Sumerian King's List is important is because it lists at the end of the first rulership, and it took 240,400 years. This is table 1 from the document I wrote. Then the flood swept over, and then the next document picks up for the Sumerian King's List and says after the flood. So it's talking about a great flood that happened. Now, the question is that Noah's flood? Because we know from Solon, when he went to the city of Sais in Egypt to find out about the history of the Greek people, in particular about Atlantis, they told him there were multiple floods, 4 major ones and multiple minor ones. So what I was trying to do with this first point was using the dates of the rulership, could we land at Noah's flood, which I believe personally, was at the end of the last ice age. So I think it was about 10,000 BC, personally. Some people believe it was 2,900 BC. So this is where it comes down to, is if you could pinpoint that, and you believe the assumption that it was caused by Nibiru, you'd have a passage point in history. Okay, this is one of the angles I tried to come at it from. And I did multiple angles, as any scientist would, to try to get to the truth here. And that's what's going to come out tonight, hopefully. And I was actually surprised at the outcome. So I'm actually very pleased, just to let you know up front. Now, so I followed this. So what did I do? I said, well, Enki says he landed here between 450,000 years ago, according to Sitchin's timetable. And in some of the other sources, it could have been earlier, as early as 360,000 years ago. So I took the conservative one, 360,000 years, subtracted 240,400 from the first rulers from the Sumerian kings list that ended with Ubaru Tutu. And I came up with, what did I come up with? 100, I think 119,000, something like that. So what? So that, oh yeah, it was 119,600 years. So I looked at that and said, well, that may have been a flood, but it certainly wasn't the 10,000 BCE. So I thought that was a dead end. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the thing that was in question there was what was the actual date to use from Enki's arrival in order to start from prehistory and go forward to the flood. All right, so that was the first attempt. The next attempt was to go, okay, well, let's go after the flood, find the Sumerian king, because we have all their reigns, so we have the time that we could accumulate. Find a Sumerian king that was documented to be in the record so that we had a firm date in stone that he was actually a ruler there, and then work backwards to see what that time was for the flood. So I did that as well. And their total rulership for all the way to the point where they switched cities was 17,980 years, and that ended with Aga of Kish. Okay. So just prior to him was Enmebarajsi, and he served for 900 years. And according to this, he was the earliest ruler on the list that was confirmed independently from epigraphical sources. So I thought, okay, well, let's start from him, work backwards to the flood date that was given at the end of the first part of the king's list,